My name is Ethan. I'm 28 years old, and for as long as I can remember, life has been nothing but a relentless storm. I live on the streets of New York City, where the cold pavement is both my bed and my prison. Fifth Avenue, with its flashing lights and endless parade of wealth, is where I spend my days. I sit on the sidewalk, invisible to the world, watching people rush past me without a second glance. My disheveled hair clings to my forehead, and my tattered clothes barely shield me from the biting wind. Hunger gnaws at me constantly, a cruel reminder of how far I've fallen. It's been 2 days since I last ate, and my body feels weak, hollowed out by exhaustion and despair. My stomach growls so loudly that even I'm embarrassed by the sound. I clutch it, trying to ignore the pain, but the aroma of hot dogs from a nearby stand torments me, making my mouth water. Just one more day, Ethan. You can survive this, I tell myself. But my own voice feels hollow, lacking the conviction it once had. The streets have a way of stripping away every ounce of pride and hope you have. I've seen others approach strangers, begging for spare change. I've watched them endure the cold stares, the curt dismissals, and the occasional cruel remarks. But I can't bring myself to do it. My pride, battered and bruised as it is, won't let me. I promised myself long ago that I wouldn't sink to that level. Yet, as the hours drag on, the temptation to rummage through the trash cans nearby grows stronger. Hunger has a way of eroding even the strongest of wills. As I sit there, lost in my own thoughts, I notice an older man sitting not far from me. He's one of the regulars on this stretch of the avenue, his face weathered and his eyes dull with resignation. "Kid, sometimes it feels hopeless, but we survive," he says, his voice hoarse from years of hardship. I nod, unable to muster a response. Survive. That's all we do out here, just survive. The day crawls by in excruciating slowness, each minute stretching into an eternity. I watch the crowds, my eyes involuntarily following people carrying bags of food or cups of coffee. I imagine what it would be like to sit in a warm cafe, the scent of freshly baked bread filling the air, the taste of something other than stale crumbs on my tongue. And then it happens. As the sun begins to set, casting a golden glow over the city, a shadow falls across me. I look up and see a woman standing in front of me. She's young, with long brown hair and piercing green eyes that seem to look right through me. For a moment, I think she's here to scold me or tell me to move along. But instead, she reaches into her bag and pulls out a paper-wrapped sandwich. "Here," she says softly, handing it to me. I stare at the sandwich in disbelief. The warmth of it seeps through the paper, and the smell of roasted meat and fresh bread makes my stomach tighten with anticipation. My hands tremble as I take it from her. "Thank you," I whisper, my voice barely audible. She smiles, a gentle, genuine smile that feels like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Take care of yourself," she says before walking away, disappearing into the crowd. For the first time in what feels like forever, I feel a flicker of hope. It's a small thing, a sandwich, a kind word. But in my world, it's everything. I unwrap the sandwich and take a bite, the flavors bursting in my mouth. It's the best thing I've tasted in years. But as I eat, I notice 2 other homeless men watching me from a distance. Their faces are gaunt, their eyes hollow with hunger. Without hesitation, I break the sandwich into 3 parts and walk over to them. "Here," I say, handing them each a piece. They look at me in surprise, their expressions a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "Thanks, kid," one of them says, his voice thick with emotion. "No one should go hungry when we can help each other," I reply, my own voice trembling. Across the street, 2 women are watching us. One of them, a younger woman with compassionate green eyes, steps forward as if to approach us. But the older woman next to her grabs her arm and pulls her back. "Don't even think about it, Olivia," the older woman hisses, her voice sharp and cold. "I won't allow you to mingle with those people." "But they need help," the younger woman protests, her voice trembling with emotion. "They'll use whatever you give them for drugs or alcohol. They're not worth your pity," the older woman snaps, dragging her away. I watch them leave, the younger woman glancing back at us with a look of sorrow and frustration. For a moment, I wonder who she is and why she cared enough to argue. But the thought passes as quickly as it came. That night, as I lie on the cold pavement, the sandwich long gone, I think about the woman who helped me. I don't know her name, but I'll never forget her kindness. It's a rare thing in this world, and it's enough to keep me going for another day. Little do I know, that small act of compassion has set something in motion that will change my life forever. The next day begins like any other, cold, gray, and unrelenting. The streets of New York are already bustling with activity, and I'm back on my corner of Fifth Avenue, invisible to the world once more. The sandwich from yesterday feels like a distant memory, but its warmth still lingers somewhere deep inside me. As I sit there, lost in thought, a familiar figure approaches. It's the older man from yesterday, the one who shared the sandwich with me. He leans heavily on his cane, his face lined with years of hardship. "Kid, you got a good heart," he says, sitting down next to me. "Not many would have shared like you did." "Just felt like the right thing to do," I reply, shrugging. He chuckles, a dry, raspy sound. "The world needs more people like you. Don't lose that kindness, no matter how tough things get." His words stick with me as the day drags on, but my thoughts are interrupted when a sleek black car pulls up to the curb. It's so out of place on this stretch of the street that even the passers-by take notice. The driver steps out, a tall man in a perfectly tailored suit, and opens the back door. Out steps the older woman from yesterday, the one who had pulled the kind-hearted young woman away. Her sharp heels click against the pavement as she approaches me, her gray eyes cold and calculating. "You're the man my stepdaughter gave a sandwich to yesterday," she says, her tone more of a statement than a question. I nod, unsure of where this is going. "What's your name?" "Ethan," I reply cautiously. "Well, Ethan, I have a proposition for you," she says, her lips curling into a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. I raise an eyebrow. "A proposition?" "Yes, one that could change your life," she continues, her voice dripping with a mixture of disdain and something else I can't quite place. She doesn't wait for my response. Instead, she gestures for me to follow her. I hesitate, my instincts screaming at me to stay put. But something about her tone, her presence, compels me to get up and follow. We walk to a nearby cafe, a stark contrast to the life I know. The smell of fresh coffee and baked goods fills the air, and I feel out of place as heads turn to stare at me, their eyes filled with judgment. The woman doesn't seem to care as she takes a seat at a corner table and motions for me to do the same. Once we're seated, she leans in, her expression unreadable. "My name is Victoria, and I believe we can help each other." I narrow my eyes, unsure of what she means. Help each other? How? "My stepdaughter, Olivia, the one who gave you that sandwich yesterday, she has a tendency to defy me. She believes she can change the world, help people like you. It's a foolish notion, but one she refuses to let go of. I need her to understand that life isn't a fairy tale, and I believe you can help me teach her that lesson." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I ask, my voice laced with suspicion. "I want you to marry her," Victoria says bluntly, her gray eyes boring into mine. I blink, convinced I must have misheard her. "You want me to what?" "Marry her," she repeats. "It'll be temporary, of course. Just long enough to show her the reality of the world she so desperately wants to save. In return, I'll provide you with enough money to turn your life around. Food, shelter, a fresh start, everything you've ever dreamed of." Her words hang in the air, heavy with implication. My first instinct is to refuse. The idea is ridiculous, cruel even. But then she adds something that stops me in my tracks. "Think about it, Ethan. With the money I'll give you, you could help not just yourself but all those people you care about. Your friends on the streets, the ones who go hungry every day. You could make a real difference." Her words hit a nerve. Images of the older man from yesterday, the others I've shared my corner with, flash through my mind. The thought of being able to help them, to give them even a fraction of what they deserve, is tempting. But the idea of using Olivia, of being part of Victoria's twisted game, makes my stomach turn. "I don't know," I say finally, my voice hesitant. "You don't have to decide now," Victoria says smoothly, her smile returning. But think about it. This is an opportunity you may never get again. With that, she stands, leaving a crisp envelope on the table in front of me. Take your time, Ethan. I'll be in touch. She walks away, her heels clicking against the tiled floor, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I stare at the envelope, my mind racing. Part of me wants to rip it to shreds, to walk away and never think about her offer again. But another part of me, the part that dreams of something better, not just for myself but for the people I've come to care about, can't ignore the possibility. That night, as I lie on the cold pavement, I can't stop thinking about Olivia. Her kindness, her compassion. It was so genuine, so unlike anything I've experienced in years. The thought of hurting her, of being part of Victoria's cruel plan, fills me with guilt. But the thought of the lives I could change with the money Victoria is offering fills me with hope. As the city sleeps around me, I make a decision. I'll hear Victoria out, but on my terms. If there's a way to help Olivia and my friends on the streets, I'll find it. Little do I know, this decision will set in motion a chain of events that will change everything, for better or worse. The following day, I find myself standing in front of Victoria's mansion. The sheer size of the place is overwhelming, its towering gates a stark reminder of the divide between my world and hers. The butler, dressed impeccably, opens the door and ushers me inside without a word. The grandeur of the interior takes my breath away. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and walls adorned with expensive artwork. It's a world I've only ever seen in passing through shop windows or on the front pages of magazines. For a brief moment, I wonder if I've made the right choice coming here. Victoria appears at the top of a grand staircase, her expression cold and calculating. She descends slowly, each step deliberate, as if savoring the control she holds over the situation. "I knew you'd come," she says with a smirk, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "I'm not here to play your game," I reply, my tone firm. "If I agree to this, it'll be on my terms." Her smirk falters for a moment, but she quickly recovers. "Very well, Ethan. Let's discuss the terms then." She leads me into a lavish sitting room, where a tray of tea and pastries awaits. I ignore the food, my focus solely on the woman sitting across from me, her steely gaze unwavering. "You said this would help Olivia," I begin, my voice steady. "But it seems like you're only trying to punish her." Victoria's smile is as sharp as a blade. "Olivia needs to learn her place. She thinks she can save the world with her naive acts of kindness. This arrangement will show her the reality of the world she's so eager to embrace." "And what about me?" I ask, leaning forward. "What happens to me after this is over?" She shrugs, her indifference palpable. "You'll walk away with more money than you've ever seen. What you do with it is your business." Her words send a chill down my spine, but I force myself to remain composed. "Fine," I say finally. "I'll do it, but only if Olivia isn't hurt in the process. If I see her suffering because of this, I'm out." Victoria narrows her eyes, clearly displeased with my condition, but she nods nonetheless. "Agreed. Now, let's get you cleaned up." Before I can protest, she calls for a servant who leads me to a guest room larger than any apartment I've ever seen. There's a wardrobe filled with clothes in my size, a bathroom stocked with every product imaginable, and a bed that looks like it belongs in a palace. I step into the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The face staring back at me is gaunt, the stubble on my jaw a reminder of the life I've been living. As I scrub away years of grime and shave for the first time in what feels like forever, I hardly recognize the man staring back at me. When I emerge from the bathroom, dressed in clothes that feel almost alien against my skin, Victoria is waiting. She looks me up and down, her expression unreadable. "You clean up well," she says, her tone begrudgingly complimentary. "Let's just get this over with," I reply, my voice devoid of emotion. Later that evening, I meet Olivia for the first time since that fateful day on the street. She's seated in the dining room, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When she sees me, her eyes widen in shock, but she quickly composes herself. "Ethan," she says, her voice filled with disbelief. "It's me," I reply, feeling a pang of guilt at the confusion in her gaze. "What are you doing here?" she asks, her tone a mixture of curiosity and concern. Before I can answer, Victoria strides into the room, her presence commanding. "Ethan is here because he has agreed to marry you," she announces, her voice as cold as the marble floors beneath our feet. The color drains from Olivia's face as she looks between Victoria and me, her expression one of betrayal. "What is this? Some kind of sick joke?" she demands, her voice trembling. "It's no joke," Victoria replies smoothly. "You wanted to help him, didn't you? Well, now you can. You'll marry him and show the world just how compassionate you truly are." Olivia turns to me, her eyes pleading. "Ethan, tell me this isn't true." I open my mouth to speak, but the words catch in my throat. How can I explain that I'm doing this for the people I care about, for the chance to make a difference? "I'm sorry," I say finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Her shoulders sag, and she shakes her head in disbelief. "I don't understand. Why would you agree to this?" Victoria steps forward, placing a hand on Olivia's shoulder. "Because he knows this is for the best," she says, her tone condescending. Olivia shrugs off her hand, her eyes blazing with defiance. "You're wrong, Victoria. This isn't for the best. It's cruel and manipulative. But if you think this will break me, you're mistaken." Her words take me by surprise, and for a moment, I see a glimpse of the strength that has carried her through life under Victoria's oppressive rule. As the days pass, preparations for the wedding move forward at an almost dizzying pace. I try to keep my distance from Olivia, sensing her anger and hurt every time our paths cross. But despite her obvious disdain for the situation, she remains composed, her resilience unwavering. One evening, as I sit in the garden, trying to clear my mind, Olivia approaches. She stands a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest. "Why are you really doing this?" she asks, her tone softer than I expect. I hesitate, unsure of how much to reveal. "Because I thought it was the right thing to do," I admit finally. Her brow furrows in confusion. "The right thing? For whom?" "For the people who need help," I reply, my voice filled with conviction. "If this can give me the means to help others, then maybe it's worth it." She studies me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "I don't agree with any of this," she says finally. "But if you're telling the truth, then maybe there's more to you than I thought." Her words give me a glimmer of hope, a small crack in the wall she's built around herself. But I know it will take more than words to earn her trust. As the wedding day approaches, the tension in the house becomes almost unbearable. Victoria is in her element, orchestrating every detail with meticulous precision, while Olivia and I navigate the situation with as much dignity as we can muster. But beneath the surface, secrets are beginning to unravel, and I can't shake the feeling that this is only the beginning of a much larger story, one that will change all of our lives forever. The day of the wedding arrives, and the mansion is alive with activity. Staff scurry through the halls, preparing for the grand event Victoria has meticulously planned. Guests begin to arrive in sleek cars, their designer outfits glinting under the midday sun. I stand in front of the mirror in the room I've been given, adjusting the cuffs of the tailored suit that feels more like a costume than clothing. My reflection stares back at me, a man caught in a whirlwind far beyond his control. I barely recognize myself, clean-shaven, well-dressed, standing in the heart of a world I'd only ever glimpsed from the outside. My stomach churns as the weight of the day presses down on me. The thought of walking into a room filled with judgmental eyes and whispers of disdain makes me want to bolt. There's a knock at the door, and before I can respond, it opens to reveal Olivia. She steps inside, her wedding dress a vision of elegance and defiance. But her expression is anything but serene. "You look different," she says, her voice tight, as if she's forcing herself to acknowledge me. "So do you," I reply, my tone softer. She closes the door behind her, folding her arms across her chest. "I need to know something, Ethan. Are you really okay with this? With being used as a pawn in Victoria's twisted game?" I hesitate, knowing that the truth isn't simple. "No," I admit, "but I'm doing it because I think I can make something good come out of this." Her eyes narrow, suspicion mingling with frustration. What kind of good? This is a farce. A cruel joke at both our expenses. I know, I say, my voice low. But I'm not just doing this for myself. There are people out there, people like me, who need help. If going through with this means I can make a difference, then maybe it's worth it. Her gaze softens, but only slightly. You really believe that, don't you? I do, I reply firmly. And I hope someday you'll understand. She shakes her head, her expression a mix of exasperation and resignation. I don't know what's worse, Victoria's cruelty or your stubborn optimism. Before I can respond, there's another knock at the door. This time, it's one of the staff, here to escort us to the ceremony. Olivia takes a deep breath, her composure returning like a shield. Without another word, she turns and walks out, leaving me to follow in her wake. The ceremony is held in the grand ballroom of the mansion, its opulence overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers cast a dazzling glow over the sea of guests. Their murmurs hushed as Olivia and I take our places at the altar. The officiant begins the proceedings, his voice echoing in the cavernous space, but his words barely register. My focus is on Olivia, standing beside me with a grace that defies the absurdity of the situation. I steal a glance at the crowd and catch Victoria's triumphant smirk. It takes every ounce of self-control not to call her out then and there, but I know this isn't the time or place. Instead, I channel my anger into resolve, determined to see this through for the sake of the people I've vowed to help. When the officiant reaches the part of the ceremony where objections are invited, the room falls silent. I hold my breath, half expecting someone to speak up, but no one does. The moment passes, and the ceremony concludes with a perfunctory exchange of vows. The applause that follows is polite but strained, the atmosphere thick with unspoken judgment. As we walk back down the aisle together, Olivia's hand resting lightly on my arm, I feel the weight of every gaze in the room. The reception is no less excruciating. Guests approach us with feigned smiles, their thinly veiled disdain evident in their clipped tones and condescending remarks. Olivia endures it all with a poise that leaves me in awe, while I struggle to maintain my composure. It's during the reception that I spot him, the elderly man who approached me outside the church. He's seated in a quiet corner, his sharp eyes scanning the room. When our gazes meet, he nods slightly, a silent signal that he has more to say. Excusing myself from the crowd, I make my way over to him. He gestures for me to sit, his demeanor serious. "There's more you need to know," he says without preamble. "I've been piecing together the truth about Victoria for years, but I didn't have all the pieces until I saw you." My heart pounds as he begins to recount his story. He was a close friend of my father, Jonathan Howard, and had long suspected foul play in his untimely death. Victoria, he claims, manipulated her way into my father's life, slowly isolating him from those who cared about him. "She's a master manipulator," he warns, his voice low. "And she's dangerous. You need to be careful." I listen in stunned silence, the pieces of my fragmented memories beginning to fall into place. The brooch, the one Victoria always wears, is a family heirloom, a symbol of my lineage. The realization hits me like a thunderbolt. I am the rightful heir to the Howard fortune, a legacy Victoria has spent years trying to erase. The weight of this revelation is almost too much to bear, but there's no time to process it. The reception continues, the guests oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Olivia notices my distraction and pulls me aside. "What's going on?" she asks, her voice filled with concern. I hesitate, unsure of how much to tell her. "There's something I need to figure out," I say finally. "But I promise, when the time is right, I'll explain everything." Her brow furrows, but she nods. "Just don't let Victoria win. Whatever she's up to, we can face it together." Her words give me a glimmer of hope, a reminder that I'm not alone in this fight. As the evening wears on, I find myself drawing strength from her presence, her unwavering determination a beacon in the darkness. That night, as I lie awake in the unfamiliar luxury of my new room, my mind races. The pieces of the puzzle are finally coming together, but the picture they form is more sinister than I ever imagined. Victoria's manipulations run deeper than I could have guessed, and the truth about my past is a weapon she never expected me to wield. For the first time in years, I feel a spark of purpose igniting within me. This isn't just about me or Olivia. It's about uncovering the truth and holding Victoria accountable for the lives she's destroyed. As I drift off to sleep, I make a silent vow. I will not let Victoria's schemes go unpunished. The truth will come out, and justice will be served, no matter the cost. Morning breaks over the mansion with an uneasy stillness. The previous day's wedding celebrations seem like a distant memory as I prepare to confront the weight of my newfound identity. The elderly man's words echo in my mind, weaving together a tapestry of betrayal, manipulation, and stolen legacy. As I step into the dining room for breakfast, the opulence of my surroundings feels suffocating. Olivia is already there, her eyes red-rimmed, suggesting she slept as poorly as I did. Victoria sits at the head of the table, her presence like a storm cloud looming over the room. She offers a cold smile as I take my seat. "Ethan," she begins, her tone dripping with false pleasantry, "I trust you're settling in well. It must be quite an adjustment, going from, well, the streets to this." Her words are a thinly veiled jab, but I refuse to let her see how they sting. Instead, I meet her gaze with calm resolve. "It's an adjustment, but one I'm handling," I reply evenly. Olivia glances at me, her expression a mix of curiosity and caution. I can tell she senses there's more to my response than I'm letting on. Later that morning, I decide it's time to act. The elderly man, Mr. Adler, had mentioned a set of documents he believed would prove my lineage and expose Victoria's misdeeds. I need to find those papers, but I can't do it alone. I find Olivia in the library, her back turned as she browses the shelves. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows bathes her in a warm glow, but there's a tension in her posture that speaks volumes. "Olivia," I say softly, and she turns to face me, her expression guarded. "What is it, Ethan?" she asks, her voice measured. "I need your help," I begin, stepping closer. "There's something you need to know about Victoria, something I've recently discovered." Her eyes narrow, suspicion flickering in their depths. "What are you talking about?" I take a deep breath, knowing this will be difficult to explain. "I'm not just a pawn in her game, Olivia. I'm the son of Jonathan Howard, her late husband, the rightful heir to this family's fortune." Her reaction is immediate, a sharp intake of breath, her eyes widening in shock. "What? How can you be sure?" "Mr. Adler, an old friend of my father's, confirmed it," I explain. "He recognized the brooch Victoria always wears. It belonged to my mother. And there are documents somewhere in this house that will prove everything." Olivia's shock quickly turns to determination. "What do you need me to do?" We spend the rest of the day searching the mansion, careful not to arouse suspicion. Victoria's office is the most likely place to find the documents, but it's locked, and we can't risk breaking in without drawing attention. As evening falls, Olivia suggests we speak with her father. Robert has always been a reluctant participant in Victoria's schemes, and Olivia believes he might be willing to help. We find him in the study, nursing a glass of whiskey. He looks up as we enter, his expression wary. "Father, we need to talk," Olivia begins, her voice steady. "It's about Victoria and Ethan." Robert's brow furrows, but he doesn't interrupt. Olivia explains what we've discovered, her words carefully measured to avoid alarming him. When she finishes, Robert sits in stunned silence, his gaze shifting between us. "Is this true, Ethan?" he finally asks, his voice low. "I believe it is," I reply, "and I need your help to prove it." Robert exhales heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. "If what you're saying is true, this changes everything. But Victoria won't go down without a fight. She's ruthless." "We're prepared for that," Olivia says firmly, "but we can't do this alone." After a long moment, Robert nods. "There's a safe in her office. It contains sensitive documents, things she wouldn't want anyone to see. I'll help you get in." That night, under the cover of darkness, Robert leads us to Victoria's office. He uses a hidden key to unlock the door, and we step inside, our movements cautious. The safe is concealed behind a painting, just as he described. As Robert works to open it, Olivia and I keep watch, the tension in the room palpable. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound makes my heart race. Finally, the safe clicks open, and Robert retrieves a stack of papers. He hands them to me, his expression grim. "I hope this is what you're looking for." I quickly sift through the documents, my hands trembling. There it is, proof of my identity, of Victoria's embezzlement, and even evidence suggesting foul play in my father's death. "This is it," I whisper, a surge of emotion washing over me. But before we can celebrate, the sound of approaching footsteps freezes us in place. Victoria's voice rings out, sharp and commanding. "What are you doing in here?" she demands, stepping into the room. Her eyes narrow as she takes in the scene, and her gaze lands on the documents in my hands. For the first time, I see fear flicker in her cold gray eyes. "Victoria," Robert begins, his tone firm, "it's over. We know everything." Her expression hardens, and she takes a step forward, her voice low and venomous. "You have no idea what you've unleashed." The confrontation that follows is a storm of accusations and denials, Victoria's facade crumbling as the weight of her lies bears down on her. Olivia stands by my side, her presence a source of strength as we face the woman who has manipulated and controlled so many lives. By the end of the night, Victoria's carefully constructed empire begins to collapse, the truth shining a harsh light on her dark deeds. But this is only the beginning. The road ahead will be long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time, I feel a glimmer of hope. The truth is out, and justice is finally within reach. Victoria's fury was unmatched as the reality of her exposed secrets set in. Her voice, once controlled and composed, now carried a desperate edge as she hurled accusations and threats. "You think you've won?" she spat, her eyes blazing as she paced the office. "You have no idea the lengths I'll go to protect what's mine." Olivia stepped forward, her voice calm but unyielding. "What's yours? You've stolen everything, money, trust, even Ethan's life. You can't keep hiding behind lies, Victoria. It's over." Robert, usually passive in Victoria's presence, found his voice. "You've destroyed this family with your schemes, Victoria. I've been blind for too long, but not anymore." Victoria's mask of control shattered completely, and she lunged for the documents still clutched in my hands. "Those are mine," she shrieked, but I held firm. "They're the truth," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging around us. "And it's time the world knows what you've done." The next day, the papers were handed over to the authorities. The revelation sent shockwaves through the social circles Victoria had carefully cultivated. Accusations of fraud, embezzlement, and even questions surrounding my father's death emerged, each one eroding the power she once held. The mansion, once her stronghold, now felt like a gilded cage. Victoria was placed under investigation, her frozen assets leaving her isolated and vulnerable. For the first time, she tasted the helplessness she had inflicted on others. Meanwhile, Olivia and I began the painstaking process of piecing together the fragments of my past. The DNA test confirmed my identity as Jonathan Howard's son. The legitimacy of my claim silenced any doubters and restored my place as the rightful heir. But with that revelation came a heavy burden, a responsibility to rebuild, not just for myself, but for all those who had been wronged. The truth of my identity settled over me like a double-edged sword. On one hand, I was no longer the forgotten beggar scraping for survival. I was Ethan Howard, the rightful heir to the wealth and legacy of the Howard family. On the other hand, the weight of what had been taken from me, the years of struggle, the loss of my father, and the countless lives impacted by Victoria's deceit, left a hollow ache in my chest. Olivia stood by me through it all. She became my anchor, her unwavering kindness a light in the storm. Together, we began to rebuild not just the estate, but a purpose for my newly reclaimed life. We started with the Howard Mansion. The once grand home, tainted by Victoria's greed, was transformed into something meaningful. The first floor was converted into a shelter, a sanctuary for the homeless. Walking through those halls, now filled with laughter and hope, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. "It's what your father would have wanted," Olivia said one evening as we watched volunteers prepare meals for the shelter's first guests. Her words carried a warmth that wrapped around me, soothing the ache of loss. But the process wasn't without challenges. Each corner of the mansion held echoes of Victoria's manipulations. Uncovering old photographs and personal belongings brought back painful memories of the boy I used to be, a child who had trusted his stepmother, only to be abandoned. Olivia found me one evening in the attic, holding a dusty photograph of my father. She knelt beside me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. "It's okay to grieve, Ethan," she whispered. "You've been through so much. Let yourself feel it." And so, for the first time since discovering the truth, I allowed myself to cry, not just for what I had lost, but for the life I was finally beginning to reclaim. Victoria's downfall continued to unfold. Each day brought new revelations of her schemes, from siphoning company funds to manipulating key figures in high society. Former allies distanced themselves, leaving her increasingly isolated. She refused to admit defeat, of course. Even as investigators uncovered damning evidence, she clung to the last remnants of her power, blaming everyone but herself. But the public was no longer on her side. News of her betrayal spread rapidly, and her name became synonymous with scandal. Meanwhile, Olivia and I worked tirelessly to expand our efforts beyond the mansion. With my inheritance, we established the Howard Foundation, a charity dedicated to aiding the homeless and providing opportunities for those in need. "I want to give back what was taken from me," I explained during the foundation's launch event. "Not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever felt invisible, forgotten, or discarded." Olivia squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with pride. "You're doing something incredible, Ethan. Your father would be proud." As the months passed, our work brought us closer. The shared purpose, the quiet moments of reflection, and the laughter we found amidst the chaos cemented our bond. I realized that I loved Olivia, not just for her compassion, but for her strength. She had faced Victoria's cruelty with grace, standing firm in her beliefs even when the odds were against her. One evening, as we walked through the now bustling shelter, I stopped her beneath the glow of the chandelier. "Olivia," I began, my voice trembling with emotion, "I never thought I'd find love in the midst of all this chaos. But you've given me hope, strength, and a reason to fight. I love you." Tears filled her eyes as she smiled. "I love you too, Ethan. From the moment I saw you share that sandwich, I knew you were special." In that moment, surrounded by the lives we were changing, I felt the beginnings of a new chapter, a life built not on wealth or power, but on love and compassion. Months turned into a year, and the pieces of my life finally started to fall into place. The Howard Foundation flourished, touching lives far beyond what I could have ever imagined. Shelters were established across the city, schools were funded for underprivileged children, and rehabilitation programs gave hope to those who thought they had none. Every day brought new challenges, but they were challenges I welcomed, because now I wasn't alone. Olivia stood by my side. Her heart as committed as mine to making a difference. Victoria's downfall was swift and brutal. The investigation into her crimes revealed years of deceit, manipulation, and embezzlement. She was tried and convicted, her desperate attempts to shift blame falling on deaf ears. The last time I saw her was in the courtroom, her once regal demeanor shattered as she was led away in handcuffs. There was no satisfaction in seeing her brought to justice, only a profound sadness for what could have been, and relief that her reign of cruelty had finally ended. The mansion, once a symbol of her greed, became a beacon of hope. On the anniversary of its transformation into a shelter, Olivia and I hosted a community dinner, inviting everyone who had been touched by the foundation's work. Standing together on the steps of the house, I addressed the crowd, my voice steady despite the wave of emotion threatening to overcome me. "A year ago, I was a man who had lost everything. But thanks to your kindness, your courage, and your support, we've built something beautiful together. This isn't just my story, it's ours. And together, we'll continue to make a difference." The applause that followed was deafening, but it was Olivia's hand in mine that grounded me. That night, as we stood on the balcony overlooking the city, I turned to Olivia. The love in her eyes mirrored the gratitude in my heart. "Olivia," I said, my voice soft, "I want to marry you again, not because of circumstance or obligation, but because you're my everything. You've shown me what love truly means, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of yours." Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Ethan, 1,000 times yes." Our second wedding was nothing like the first. It was simple, intimate, and filled with the people who mattered most. The people we had helped, and those who had helped us. As Olivia and I exchanged vows, I felt a profound sense of peace. The pain of the past hadn't disappeared, but it no longer defined me. I was no longer the boy who had been abandoned, or the man who had been lost. I was Ethan Howard, and I had finally found my place in the world. Together, Olivia and I continued our work, dedicating our lives to the foundation and the people it served. Every act of kindness, every life changed, was a testament to the power of compassion and resilience. And though the scars of my past would always remain, they served as a reminder of how far I had come and how much farther I had to go. Because in the end, it wasn't about reclaiming wealth or status. It was about building a life filled with love, purpose, and hope. And that, I realized, was the greatest legacy of all. Years later, as Olivia and I sat on the steps of the mansion, watching our children play in the garden, I felt a sense of completeness I had never known before. Who would have thought, I mused, that a simple act of kindness could lead to all this? Olivia smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "Kindness changes everything, Ethan. It's why we're here." And as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, I knew she was right. We had turned pain into purpose, and together, we had built a future worth fighting for.